When people make those very specific suggestions and they just say, this is the one thing that you need to grow your glutes, that drives me crazy because there's so many things that you need to know to be able to do that. It's not just you need to eat these foods to grow your glutes or you need to do this exercise to grow your glutes. I think that when we look at glutes specifically, I have seen firsthand, especially with being in the competitor realm, of people can have very great genetics that they store their body fat all in their glutes. Where I'm sure some of you guys listening to this could be like, oh, when I gain weight, it immediately goes to my core first, or it immediately goes to my arms first. People distribute weight all different ways.
Wits and Weights community, welcome to another episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome Sue Bush, co-owner of Physique Development, certified personal trainer, fitness nutritionist, and competitive physique athlete. Now, she and I were the two contributors to the March issue of Body by Science, Dr. Bill Campbell's research review, and we decided to collaborate on each of our podcasts as well. So I'm super excited and invited Sue on the show to talk about a fun topic, especially for the ladies out there, and that is how to develop a shapely butt, or more precisely, how to build strong, functional, and aesthetically pleasing glutes. Why do we love this area of the body so much? What are the benefits of glute development beyond just looking good? And what are the most effective training strategies, exercise selection, and programming considerations for optimal results with the glutes? You'll also learn the role of nutrition, genetics, and individual response in glute development. And Sue will give us some practical tips, as always, for different ages, equipment, and individual response. Sue's journey in the fitness industry began in 2017 while finishing her degree in broadcast journalism. Since then, she's accumulated multiple certifications, including becoming a certified personal trainer and fitness nutritionist through ACE and earning her perinatal certification. Sue also has competed in physique competitions for 4 seasons, most recently in 2022. With years of experience coaching lifestyle clients and a passion for empowering women to prioritize their health and fitness, Sue specializes in helping individuals make sustainable lifestyle changes that align with their goals and schedules. Together with her husband, Alex Bush, and the rest of the team, PD, at Physique Development, Sue is committed to leading, educating, and inspiring generational change through the power of health and excellence. Sue, I'm really excited we could do this. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for the wonderful intro. It makes me sound really cool.
Well deserved. I'm glad we could connect, since being on that issue of Bill's together. And I think I reached out to you and said, we need to collaborate here with our podcast and share with our audiences what's going on. And one of the things you've been talking about lately on your IG and elsewhere is glute training. I know you've had some long Q&As on your podcast, and I encourage people to go check those out as well. But my first question to you is, why do we love butts so much? What is the attraction to this area of the body? Is it social, cultural? Is it, a functional thing? Where does this all come from?
Well, we could refer back to songs back in the 70s from Casey and the Sunshine Band, like Shake, 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 or Queen of Fat Bottom Girls, or even go to the 90s where we have Sir Mix-a-Lot singing
Classic.
about how much he likes big butts. And even to present day, songs like Anaconda going very viral. But at the core of it, it's actually primal. So, Dr. David Lewis has said that our male ancestors developed an attraction to women with big butts because it increased their chances of having offspring that would live long enough to pass on their DNA. So, it's really an indicator of fertility. If you think back to the caveman days, they're looking and they're wanting to see someone that does have that fertility, can carry on the DNA. And there's also a 2014 study done that found that women with a larger waist to hip ratios had higher levels of the hormone needed to get pregnant and therefore possessed increased chances of fertility. There's also the aspect of you need strong legs and the ability to balance with your center of gravity changing with pregnancy. So it showed that women with larger butts could finish the pregnancy, and having that body fat, because normally to have bigger glutes, you have to have a little bit higher body fat, was a sign of being able to support the pregnancy as well. So again, if we go back to the caveman days, if someone was very, very thin, they might not be able to carry a pregnancy or get pregnant. Whereas if you had a little junk in the trunk, then that was a good signaling of like, hey, you can carry on the DNA, you can sustain a pregnancy and then be able to have a healthy child. But another role in this is going to be pop culture. So think of what is popular and what we consume constantly. Think about things like the Kardashians, which are extremely popular, namely Kim. And we think back to like that champagne photo shoot she did. Butts were all the rage. And even thinking about female rappers, like I mentioned, the song Anaconda, as well as a lot of female rappers not only rapping about butts, but also having that larger behind. So like Nicki Minaj, Meg The Stallion, Cardi B, Doja Cat, and more, and even the popularity of BBLs across the land. So there's multiple things. I do believe that at the core of it, it is primal, but past that, it has really transformed into like that societal and pop culture. Because again, we consume so much that then pushes us into what we like, what we dislike, what we find attractive, all of those different things.
So then why do you care about it personally?
I care about it because I always didn't have a butt. And it's kind of like you always want what you don't have. And when I got into lifting, I just felt extremely empowered by being able to truly shape my body and be able to change the way that I looked. And it was something where I could see muscles that I had never seen before. It was something where I always struggled with glute growth. I got made fun of it in middle school and high school, being told that my back went straight down to my legs. I was even having a conversation with my sister about it, and she was just like, people don't get it. Like, we are not genetically blessed to have glutes within our family. Like, if you see the other people in my family, it's not like, oh, that's kind of where they store fat or that's where the genetics are. And so I always wanted to acquire it. Now, part of it also was because of competing in bikini competitions, which I don't do anymore, but that was something that was needed for the look, is to have bigger glutes. But I just love I just
Yeah.
love how it makes me feel to be able to, again, have that shape and really go after and say, hey, I want this muscle bigger, and then being able to go and do that. So even though I'm sure there is some influence from pop culture, it's also the aspect of it was something that I always wanted for my own self confidence. And then the more I learned about glutes, the more I saw the benefit of having glutes overall.
You hit on so many great points that highlight the positive aspects of physique development, and I think there are many. And that is, like you said, being able to have this power over your body, whatever that is. It could be, an asymmetry, or it could simply be just overall size and strength and function. And you were talking recently on one of your episodes about I'll say the vanity or the visual aspects of physique development, and there's no wrong reason for doing any of this stuff, right? If it's positive and contributes toward our well-being, in my opinion, there's no wrong reason to do it. So I was curious, of that for you. And I want to segue into the benefits of developing the glute. We can definitely talk about the aesthetics, which probably doesn't take a long discussion. We kind of just covered it. But the strength and functional benefits. And one thing you did mention was the little bit of higher body fat may be needed as well, at least tied into the history of the glutes. I do want to bring that in as well as we talk about training and development. Don't forget that point of
Mhm.
it, in case there's a little hack there that people need to know about. So what are the benefits? And then we can get into some specifics.
Yeah, well, the big benefit is it allows you to function as a human being by having glute tissue. I really like to tell this story because when I first got started personal training, I was training in person. And of course, one of my first few clients were my parents, as good parents do, just to support their kids. And I remember I was having my dad do hip thrusts, and he was like, I'm not trying to like grow big glutes. Like, do I need to be doing this? And I was like, yes, because as you age, and you are already aging, this is something that you are going to need to be able to age gracefully and to age while you can still function. Because, of course, there's the aesthetic side. And I think that a lot of times people try to push, like, this is good for your health. And it's like, if we just knew it was good for our health, don't you think there'd be a lot of other things that we would already be doing? But we have to think about us as human beings. And there is that vanity side of, okay, I want to look a certain way, which I think is so good to be able to focus on, because like you said, if it contributes to you positively, why not? But when we're looking at the glutes, they're going to play a key role in hip stability and pelvis stability, which is going to be so important for things like walking, which we all do, jumping, sprinting, strength training. And it's also something where if we look at the different parts of the glute, they are going to help with hip extension and being able to externally and internally rotate and abduct. So moving the thigh away from the body. And it's also going to allow to keep our bodies upright and making sure that our bodies are pushed forward to a certain degree. So it's going to allow you to function in those everyday tasks, which is what I always like to boil it down to is, okay, yes, here's the aesthetic side. And yes, you can want to grow your glutes, but let's also talk about why it's important and how it helps you to just be a functioning human being, not even talking about, I want to build glutes so big that everyone thinks I got a BBL, but more so of, I want to be able to walk as I age. I hear so often, and I know we're going to touch on it a little bit later about as you age and what that looks like for different generations. But a lot of times you hear people want to say they want to play with their grandkids or they want to play with their kids. And it's like a part of playing is being able to walk or
Mhm.
stand upright. And your glutes are going to be a major mover in that. And not to mention how the pelvis then also like goes hand in hand with your core and being able to have that in a good spot, which also goes hand in hand with your glutes. Because when you see people that often have like an anterior pelvic tilt, it's normally that they have really weak core muscles that they can't pull their core in. And it's having that tilted over movement. And that can be from also having weak glutes. And so being able to see how this goes into just how your body literally stands allows you to be like, oh, okay, yes, I can want huge glutes, but I can also want it because it allows me to function as a human being.
Yeah, so what you're saying is it's part of the core, right? Because sometimes
Yeah.
people think of the core as just the the rectus
Yeah.
abdominis. It's really part of that whole
Your
trunk.
abs.
Yeah, right. And the thing about pushing forward, explain that just a little bit for listeners when you said, because you talked about abduction, you also talked about posture and being upright. What do you mean by the pushing forward?
So the aspect of your glutes, like I talked about within your pelvis, that's going to be something that if your pelvis isn't sturdy, then it can put you in a place. And it can also be depending on what it looks like for how you use your glutes. That if your glutes are weak, it can force your body that when it's not balanced, that it compensates with other things. And so then it puts you in a place where it's really difficult because, like you talked about with that core box as a whole, that where you have like not just the back of your hips and where your glutes are across your like hip ridge as a whole, but you're also thinking of like your extensors and being able to keep you upright and like push you forward to the degree of not like, okay, I'm going to like lean forward all the way, but more so of the degree of we have forward lean in our bodies and how our rib cages like stand as a whole. So we're not just completely straight up and down. There is some movement there
Got it.
within our body.
Yeah, I love that. Almost like an athletic position, if you will.
Hmm.
You mentioned getting made fun of for not having much of a butt. I got made fun of for having too much of a butt for a guy. And I wonder about the genetic differences there. Like how much of that is where we store fat versus muscle, and how consequential are those genetics? Like you've already mentioned, you can make a change to that, but what is the impact of those genetics when we think of our baseline before we get into, okay, now what do we do for training and nutrition?
Yeah, I think one part of that, especially with you talking about like male versus female, it can be on your limb lengths as a whole and how you're able to move through different movements. So, for example, my husband does have big glutes and I've always been jealous of them, but his body is basically primed to be able to bias glutes. And so, the way that he has for his femur length and how his core length. So, I personally have a longer torso and I have long femurs. So, if you know anything about just what that means for your overall body levers, that means it's going to be very difficult to be able to target your glutes. And so, no movement am I set up in to automatically bias glutes. Whereas my husband, again, his levers are all set up that anytime he does any type of squat, he's biasing his glutes. Anytime he does like any kind of like stepping, even like a step up, he is majorly biasing his glutes. Where for me, I had to kind of play around with how I get set up in the movement. So I think part of it is not only going to be, and I mean, genetics are going to play into your limb length to a certain degree, but it's also just going to be how your body is laid out for the levers that you are able to do different exercises. So if you even think about things, I always like to use the example of people say, like, oh, I'll never look like that person. And it's like, you may never look like that person because your body is built completely different, not in regards of where your fat is or how lean you are. I'm talking in regards to, like, if someone has really short glute insertions, they might be able to show and have like a really bubbly glute just because they don't have as much muscle to fill in and it's able to protrude more and give a different look. Whereas I personally have really long glute insertions, which is great in the term of being able to build like these long diamond glutes, but it's also a lot of glute to fill out. Like, think about in the fact of if you have someone who is 6 foot versus 5'5", and you even think about that in terms of bodybuilding, the reason they do by height and then also by weight is because there's such a differential in that of each inch you can add 10 to 20 pounds to your body and it still look the same as someone else that might be an inch or two shorter than you. And so being able to keep that in mind of what it looks like to actually add muscle to that tissue instead of using it in a discouraging way of, oh, I'm never going to look like that person. How I've really turned it around for myself is, okay, what are the things, like, how can I learn about myself to then reset my expectations and then be able to have new goals for myself? If I can still look at someone and say, like, oh, they have a great physique or I would love to look like them, but instead of then tearing myself apart because I don't look like them, I kind of backtrack and I don't pick them apart, but I'll just say, like, oh, they have a shorter femur and they have a shorter torso. So that's going to make it that they have a much better way of being able to bias their glutes, or they have those shorter insertions, so that I can just be kinder to myself and be able to realize what that looks like. But genetics do play a huge, huge role when it comes to your glutes and just how your body looks. It's going to be something where it's not the only factor, like we've already mentioned, but it's something that when we have genetics, that's also going to determine where your body fat is stored. And I think that when we look at glutes specifically, I have seen firsthand, especially with being in the competitor realm, of people can have very great genetics that they store their body fat all in their glutes. Where I'm sure some of you guys listening to this could be like, oh, when I gain weight, it immediately goes to my core first, or it immediately goes to my arms first. People distribute weight all different ways. And sometimes people are very lucky and it goes to their glutes first. And you see that, why I mentioned competing, is you see it firsthand when you're trying to lose weight because you're doing extreme weight loss of, oh, that actually wasn't tissue. That was really well distributed fat, which is very lucky for people. I'm not hating on it. I'm jealous of it that that is the case. But again, genetics play a huge role in not only your limb lengths, your levers, but then just how you're going to distribute fat and how easy it is for you to gain muscle overall. Because I'm also sure we know some people who barely work out and have muscles, where you might feel like, I've been trying really hard for years and I don't have that same muscle tissue. And like those freaks of nature normally come to fruition within competing again, because you see these people and they just build this insane physique and it's like, how did they do that? And it's like, oh, genetics played a role. Not to take away from their hard work at all, it takes hard work regardless, but some people are just a little bit more blessed about how their everything, all their anthropometrics lay out for them.
You're speaking my language too. I love this. I think you just took genetics, and rather than make it this like thing we have and let's move on, it's actually, we need to understand our genetics very intimately through our training and biofeedback and collecting data and measurements. And I'm sure there's lots of things we can get into of how to do that, besides just you see it and you know it in many cases. But things like muscle belly insertions, limb lanes, I love all of that, because the listener can then say, okay, I've been doing X movement religiously, decent amount of volume. I'm responsive to building muscle, but not in this one part of my body, even though that movement is supposed to be giving me that. That's
Hmm.
probably a signal that that's not the best for you, assuming it's not a form or other issue. So I love genetics as a baseline of awareness, and then not beating yourself up for it, but being kind to yourself and knowing that this is data that you can now be empowered from and take
Hmm.
action from. So totally love that. And so then that leads into, once you have that baseline information, what should we be measuring? And then we can get into the training approach, all the things people are waiting for, like, what movements do I do? How do I adjust for me? How do I program and things like that? So how do we start and then get into that discussion?
Yeah, as far as what we should measure or kind of keep track of, one thing I like to say is if you want to see progress, track progress. And that's where a lot of people fall short is they get so into I want to see results, I feel like I'm working hard, and it's like are you looking at the data? Because the only way to move forward is with data-driven decisions. And that's not just in training, that is within everything, whether you're trying to post content on social media, whether you're trying to grow a business, whether you're trying to grow your glutes, you need to be able to look at data to make decisions. And so if you have no idea, you're not tracking your training volume, you're not taking check in photos, you don't know what your weight is, you have no idea how much you're eating or what that looks like consistency day to day, you have no idea what your steps are or how long you're sitting in a day, you don't know how much water you have. If you're not tracking any of that, then how can you expect to see results forward? And so, of course, we could go through an extensive list and even just the list I made of you might say, oh, that seems like a lot to track. And it's like, yes, this is hard work, period. Yes, there are some different things you can do to make sure you're working smarter, not harder. But at the end of the day, you are going to have to put effort forward. And that might mean tracking some metrics. And that's what I always go to when people get started. They're like, well, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? And I'm like, why don't you just track what you're doing for a week? Let's circle back on that baseline and let's make decisions off of that. And people get really antsy and they're like, well, aren't you just going to tell me what the plan is? And it's like, I can't make a plan if I don't know the data to then make a thing. Because if I just say, oh, just go ahead and get 8,000 steps and just go ahead and do this. It might be that that person's getting 2,000 steps a day and I just told them to go to 8,000. Or it might be that person's getting 16,000 steps a day and I just said, get at least 8,000. And since I said at least, they're going off the charts and we're getting all of this inflammation possibly and not getting enough food in place because I didn't know what the data was. And so the biggest thing I would tell you, regardless of what you track, just track something. Even if you just start with one or two things, I'm not saying go from tracking nothing to track everything, but maybe it's starting at, okay, let me just track my food for a week. Not trying to hit specific macros. Let me just see what I'm eating in a week. Okay, maybe from there I go ahead and I add on my steps. Then I go ahead and I add on my water intake, whatever it may be. Just tracking some progress is going to be so much better than nothing. But specifically within glute growth, I think that like food and training obviously go hand in hand with so many things. People hear that time and time again. And you might wonder of, okay, which one is more important? And I think that kind of opens the conversation of like what came first, the chicken or the egg. It's like both are important, period. But if we are looking at some things, I think I like to look at if you don't know anything about nutrition and you already have somewhat of a regular training routine, regardless if we're going to consider your training quote right or quite quote wrong, if you already have some sort of training routine and you're doing nothing with nutrition, then I would recommend starting with nutrition. But if you're in a place where you have gotten some education about nutrition and you haven't really gotten into training, then let's start with training. And so I don't think it's a one size fits all of, hey, start with this thing or this is the thing that you need to focus on. And when people make those very specific suggestions and they just say, this is the one thing that you need to grow your glutes, that drives me crazy because there's so many things that you need to know to be able to do that. It's not just you need to eat these foods to grow your glutes or you need to do this exercise to grow your glutes. It's a multifaceted thing that you need to be able to then look at yourself and reflect and say, what do I need to focus on a little bit more? And have honest conversations with yourself because that's something where I see, and I'm sure you do a lot across the board, is that someone might be like, well, I am training consistently. And it's like, are you? Like, are you actually like, let's have an honest conversation with ourselves about what that looks like, or even saying, like, I train hard. It's like, okay, are you tracking your training sessions at all? Are you just trying to gauge it by if you feel tired at the end of it or if you feel sore the next day? And so, really digging into what it means for each person, because it also means different things for each person, is the big thing that I try to dive into, especially if I'm talking about a client or someone's like asking me a question in the DMs of like, should I do this or should I do this? I'm like, well, why do you want to do that? What does this other thing? I normally respond with asking more questions instead of just giving an answer.
I'm laughing inside because this is what happens when we get two coaches who agree on all this stuff. And I think the listener, they've heard a lot of this, like you're the female version of me. And with a lot of what you're saying, I mean, everything from the tracking, yeah, you're so right. Like, is it harder to track or is it harder to just continue having no clue why what you're doing is not giving you the result
Mhm.
you want. Like that's one of the things I like to say. It's hard, but like tracking your budget's hard too, but it's better
Yeah.
than being broke, you know?
Choose your
So,
hard, truly. Like, just
for
decide
real.
which hard you want to take because they 'cause
Yes.
they're all gonna be hard, and it
Yes.
might feel like something might feel easier, but is that a short-term comfort for
Short term easy.
long-term
Yeah.
discomfort?
Yeah.
Because you have to think about that too, of it might feel like it's easier in the moment to do something else, but in the long run, how is that gonna make you feel? Because that's how I felt even about fitness, is that I used to make fun of people who ate healthy and were, like, working out because part of it was likely because I wasn't doing it and I felt insecurity about that, whatever it may be. I also just felt that I didn't understand that people could truly be happy doing that. I was coming from a place of like, that doesn't make me happy to train and do all these other things or to eat a certain way. But it came down from also, I was living day to day with being depressed because of the foods that I was eating and from my lack of movement and the lack of keeping promises to myself. And I literally had to hit rock bottom before I realized of like, oh, this easy isn't actually easy. This is causing most of the issues in my life. I am the one contributing to my own downfall here. And that's what I mean about honest conversations is you can say, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough this. I get it. Like, I'm not here to tell you like you do have enough time. You just need to do X, but you get to decide what you do with your time. And so if you want to continue to say, I can't do that, or that doesn't make me feel good, or that feels hard, you have to ask yourself, all right, then are you okay living the way that you're living? And you can't expect to see the results if you, again, are not wanting to put in effort. I always talk about having to align your effort with your expectations. If you have a certain expectation of what you want to occur, does your effort match that? And most of the time it's no. And you have to fill that gap of you either have to lower your expectation or you have to increase your effort.
Yeah, there's so much reframing there. I mean, it does often come down to identity and self talk and expectations. When you also mentioned individuals who ask you these questions that are always going to have an it depends answers. And that's why you follow up with questions back to them. But I also like how you said, if you've got a piece taken care of, maybe it's this other piece that we want to focus on, even if it isn't optimal over here. I think on one of your podcasts, you talked about harmony versus balance, right? Like
Mhm.
we're not trying to balance everything in perfect proportion to everything else. We're trying to integrate everything. And if there's one area that's lagging, maybe that's where we focus. So let's set the context then for the glute training discussion. If someone is listening who does have most of the things in place. Let's say they have been tracking their food, they understand their maintenance calories, they know how to eat plenty of protein, they're eating nutrient dense foods, things like that, and they're training 3 or 4 days a week with typical hypertrophy or strength program. And now they're like, my glutes aren't where I want them to be. Where would we go from that point in terms of training considerations or anything else?
The first two things that I look at within that are going to be training intensity and training execution. So we have a staff of coaches and we one of the coaches had reached out to me and was like, "Hey, this is what's going on with this client. They are doing this and this. They're checking all of the boxes, but here are the pictures. I'm still not seeing the results that I want to see with this client." And I said, "Have you ever seen a video of them exercising?" And they're like, "Well, they send some exercise videos, but it's always when they are doing very lightweight and trying to nail down the movement." I said, "Do you know that for a fact, or are you making that assumption that that is what they are doing in that video?" And they were like, "Oh, wow, I feel like such an idiot for not looking at this sooner." I was like, "You don't need to feel like an idiot. This is just the gap." And this is where a lot of coaches and especially online coaches fall short is they do not look at the people training. That is the most massive thing that you miss out with training online is you don't actually get to see the person train. And that's why it is a very huge part of our service is you are going to send videos of you training and we mark in the training, these are the videos I want to see, this is when I want to see them, and this is the reason I want to see it, whether it's checking your form or checking your intensity on something. Because I find most of the time, even if someone's like, oh, yeah, I'm hitting this RPE and I am training hard, it's like, then let me see it. Let's see what failure looks like for you. And that's not to say that you should take everything to failure. I think that's where I struggle with talking about intensity is I feel like people then go to the extreme and they're like, I need to be limping out of the gym and I need to take everything to failure and actually be dying. And it's like, you need to, again, put in effort. You do need to have intensity, but there is a push and pull to that when it comes to your recoverability and what it looks like for the goal of the training. And so I always look at the execution and intensity. And I've even found when it comes to my clients that the clients that normally are coaches themselves, they'll be like, I just want to learn from you, or I just want the accountability. And then I'm like, then I need to see these videos. And they're like, I know how to do the exercise. Like, I'm a coach too. And I was like, all right, then like send the video and I'll tell you it's all good to go. And that's normally they are shocked of like, oh, I'm not having the best execution in this, or I'm not having the right intensity within what I'm doing. And so I would highly recommend that if you are working with a coach, to send videos to your coach, even if it feels like you don't want to whip out your phone in the gym and you don't want to have the tripod and all that stuff. Again, that's one thing of, are you willing to have less results by not having that slight discomfort of having your phone out, or are you willing to take the video to make sure that you get the best results possible? And so I would highly recommend that you're sending in regular videos. That's something we also say is the clients that have the best results time and time again are the clients that regularly send in exercise videos. And I will even like nag some of my clients of like, I haven't seen videos in this amount of weeks, and like I need to check back on this, instead of just saying we're going through the motions.
The most value that I got from this was the fact that I had someone that I could talk to about anything and that there was going to be no judgment. It was just, well, here are your goals. Here's the best way that you're going to achieve it. And then let's work together to help you feel inspired and motivated to do that. And there's a lot of people out there trying to be coaches, and not all of them have done the work. And also just be a genuine person that is positive and coming from the heart in terms of wanting to help. And Philip really embodied all of those qualities. I would recommend him to just about anyone that's looking to achieve goals in that realm of their nutrition and building new habits.
So if you have a coach, then go ahead and send them a video. If you don't have a coach, then I will have a video that I'm going to send to Philip for him to put in the show notes. But it's me going through like RP and intensity. And I think that that's going to be really, really helpful, because I go through a whole training session, or most of a training session, and I talk through in my head of why I'm rating it a certain RPE and what you have to keep in mind for that. And then our YouTube channel also has almost every exercise of how to do the exercise execution, because that is so, so important to be able to have the correct execution. But even just videoing yourself, like that goes such a long way, even if you don't have a coach that you're sending it to, because I do not want you trying to look over in the mirror and make sure that your form is correct. Take a video of yourself, go back and watch it. I do that personally still. Like, yes, I have a coach and I send stuff to the coach, but not everything, because sometimes I take a video and I'm like, oh, I can just make this small tweak and then I'm good to go. And I will watch our own videos, compare, make sure that it's all set, and use that time and time again. So, regardless of if you have a coach or not, there is an actionable plan for you recording yourself training and being able to send that. And again, having those honest conversations of, is this hard versus is this reaching the actual RPE that I need to? Because I have very many times gone in, done a set, and been like, man, that was hard. I'm not going to go up in weight. And then I think back and I say, how many more reps could I have done at that weight? And sometimes I'll be like, oh, that was hard. That was definitely an RPE 8. And then I'll ask myself, how many more reps could you have done? And I'll be like, maybe 3 or 4. And it's like, that just went from an 8 to a 6 RPE real quick. And I realize how much stronger I am. And having that logbook is a big, big part of it. Because if you are not tracking things in a logbook, whether it's a digital logbook or an actual logbook, then do not complain about your progress. I swear to God, do not complain about your progress if you are not tracking anything within your training. Because I have notes, and it not only helps me to cut out all the guessing of what weight I should go to, even if the training stimulus changes, even if the order of the exercise change, even if anything changes, I can make a very, very, very good educated guess and almost always be within 5 to 10 pounds of where I need to be on the first time I do something, because of keeping that logbook. not just because, oh, she's a coach, this is what she dedicates her time to and all of that. It's because I take the extra effort and I track these extra things and I make notes. So it'll say, this was a little bit easy starting off, go to this weight next week. Or this is what it's not just keeping the weight, because if you're like, oh, I can keep track of like I did 80 pounds for this last time, it's like it's not just knowing your general weight for it. Because again, the rep range can change, the set number can change, the tempo can change, where it is in the session can change, so many things. But then there's also different forms of improvement. Of it's not just I just increased in weight. You could have had better form at the same weight. You could have had better engagement at the same weight. You could have had better tempo at the same weight. You could have used the same weight and gotten more reps, or done it for more sets, or done it with less rest in between the sets. So there's so many things that go into it, and there's no physical way, unless you have a perfect photographic memory, for you to not track those things and think that you're just going to go into the gym and know what to do, because you're likely wasting your time trying to pick the right weight. Then when you finally get to the right weight, you might have accumulated volume from trying to pick the right weight. You're elongating your sessions, you're making it confusing for yourself, and you're not being able to just go in there and train. And that's where people are also getting frustrated of, I'm not able to see the results that I want. And it's like, yeah, because you're not going in there and tracking what you need to get it done. So having a logbook is, outside of just filming yourself, is going to be a huge part of the intensity, to make sure that you've got everything locked down.
So much there, Sue.
It's
You're
hard
good.
doing a podcast with
No,
someone you agree with everything, because then you're just like,
it
yes,
is.
yes.
It is. It is. But this is super important. What this section right here, I mean, literally, we just cut this out as its own masterclass, because the answer to the question of what do we do for our training for glutes wasn't, do these movements or follow this program, right? It was train hard, execute, use the proper intensity. And here are the tools for how to do that. And this is applicable to everything in your training. And it's super important. And when you were talking about videos, I was chuckling inside, because how many times have I told people, just take a damn video, send it. And
Hmm.
you're gonna accelerate your personal growth so much from one video, versus banging your head against potentially terrible form for the next, 3 months of your
And
training.
then that also compounding and causing
Yeah.
aches and pains.
Yes.
And you're just like, oh, I can't train because I just feel awful. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, part of that could be because of how you're training.
Yeah, and it gets worse and worse as the load goes up, right? Because you're
Oh,
just doing
yeah.
bad form with heavier load. It actually reminded me of other areas outside of fitness at all, like public speaking. I'm a huge, one of the ways I got better at speaking was videoing myself and having other people look at it and myself look at it. Anything you do in life that you can record or take data, it goes back to your original principle, is going to accelerate the growth. You mentioned some really good things, right? Like not looking at the mirror. I think that's funny because you could get really hurt, like twisting your body to look at
Yes.
the mirror. Don't do that. Even if the mirror is ahead of you, just don't
They're
do
like,
that.
I'm going to keep my chin tucked to make sure my spine's in alignment, but then I'm going to
Then I'm
actually
going
just
to
completely
twist.
turn my spine and put it in a very inadvantageous position.
Yes. I mean, maybe if you're doing bicep curls or something like
Yes.
that, it's fine. But and then you said log everything, and by logging, not just logging your training, we do talk about that a lot, like using a notebook or an app or whatever makes sense. But like you said, there are many other kind of hidden variables, if you will. There's
Mhm.
the things that change from what you planned. There are the speed or the RP or RAR, however you want to measure the intensity and the movement, which you can correlate with your video. Like you said, are you
Mhm.
slowing down, or what does hard look like to you? Because not everybody slows down the same way. And I found that like on certain movements, I'm going to slow down more than on others as I get to that RPE. Also, I don't know if you mentioned it, but like all the stuff's happening outside the gym. Like that, if you have that information as well, that's going to affect your
Yeah.
training session too.
Even on my
Yeah.
training log at the top of it, I say the time in which I'm training. So if ever a weight is off, or like, those times where you're just like, this just felt hard today, or things just felt heavy today. So for that reason, I have things written at the top, and I say what time I'm training, how many meals I've had, and then I just say the date that it is. And then if I have any extra notes, so if I say something like, I'm on my cycle and I'm having cramps, or this is, I ate too far away from when I'm training, or if I just see it and it's like, hey, you're training at 5 p.m. and you've only had 2 meals in, then that might affect how your strength is. Or I'll note, had a poor night of sleep last night, whatever it may be, so that when I'm looking back at numbers, it's not just I'm taking the number from last week and putting it into this week. I'm looking at the factors from the previous session and taking that into the following one, because there's been so many times I've even surprised myself of being in a place where it's like, okay, I was hitting this RP in man, this was really hard last session. And then the next session, I'm like, oh, I just kind of zoomed past that weight and it was great. And it's not like, yes, there is the adaptations that you have and the growth, all of that is a part of it for sure. But it's also the aspect of, okay, if you had better factors going into it and you were able to be more primed for it, then you're going to have a better session. And it reinforces so many things by keeping that data. Because anytime I'm thinking like, oh, that was hard, then I'll look back and I'll be like, oh, yeah, because you're doing 20 more pounds than you did the week before. So it's okay that it's difficult.
Yep.
Or it was hard. That's because you didn't sleep well last night and you got over 8,000 more steps than you normally get the day before. So your legs might be a little bit sore. And so understanding the data and being able to take that into it just allows you to, again, reframe things so much better that you don't always have to fight against yourself. I learned, I guess it wasn't that many years ago, but I did learn within the past few years that life is a lot better when you're not constantly fighting yourself. There are many other things to fight with. There are many other things that you're going up against. There are many things outside of your control, but control the controllables and don't fight against yourself. And so if I've seen, hey, these are the things going on, then I'm not going to take that and either tear myself down or try to do the impossible up against what's already stacked. It's like, this is what I know to be true. What changes do I need to make because of that? Or what do I need to take into consideration because of that? So then it's not that I constantly feel like, oh, my favorite is I'm hitting a plateau.
Yep.
It's like,
This is the buzzword of the day.
is it a plateau or did you just not know what data you are even looking at? And so you just stepped on the scale maybe 3 times within a week and it's the same number, or you feel like you're quote use the same weight and can't progress. It's like, let's look at the other data and then let's really determine, is this a plateau or not? Because I will tell you 8 times out of 10, it's not
It's
normally
not
a
actually
plateau.
a plateau. Yeah, it's so good. That's so good. That is the
I would have
first
said
thing.
10
Yeah.
times out of 10, but, I'll give some people the benefit of the doubt that it could be, so 8 times out of 10.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's like if we define plateau as just data hasn't moved, factually that may be a plateau. But like you said, there could be 5 variables playing against each other that kind of offset, and then therefore this one
Yeah.
variable didn't change, but something else is going on there.
Even recently, I
Yeah,
mean, I have had a lot go on personally in my life. That's been a lot. And so I could have been said, oh, I'm plateaued right now. And it's like, no, it's just that fitness isn't the number one focus because your stress bucket is overflowing and you only have one stress bucket. And so you had to bring training volume down. So that's just not the main thing that you're going to see progress in right this second. Does not mean you're plateauing, does not mean you'll never see results. It just means that you have to, again, be honest with yourself about what's the priority, what you are dedicating your time and energy to, and what that looks like, instead of just claiming that something isn't going the way that you want it to, maybe because you haven't given enough time and you just want things to happen faster. And I mean, spoiler alert, we'd all like things to happen faster, better, stronger, easier, all of that. But as my parents said, fair comes once a year. If you miss it, it's your own darn fault.
there you go. There's another thing I said recently. It's going to go as fast as it's going to go if you're doing it right. Like
Yeah,
that's it. It's just going to go as fast. That's
100%.
as fast as it can go is when you're doing it right, and it may be slower than you want. Okay, so now somebody is dialed in on their training and their execution, their intensity. They're taking videos. Maybe they have a coach, or maybe they're listening to these podcasts and actually
Mhm.
taking action, like we suggest. They're logging everything, and now they're like, my glutes still have more opportunity to get bigger. So we're 45 minutes in. Now people want to know, okay, does it come down to exercise selection, programming? Like what are the next steps?
I will say that it's not ever going to be one particular exercise or one rep scheme or a certain amount of sets or a specific intensity. There's not going to be a perfect answer for that. But if you have nailed down your intensity and your execution and you're doing all the other things within food and rest and recovery, all that jazz, then I would say we're looking at exercise selection overall. And part of it, like I kind of already talked about, is going to be what exercises work for you. And that is not synonymous with what exercises do you like doing. It's going to be what exercises work for you. So, a good example of this, and this goes even just hand in hand with glute training overall, back squats. Back squats can 100% target your glutes. I'm not here to dispute that or to argue that. That is a fact that you can target your glutes with a back squat. For me personally, because of having a long torso and longer femurs, back squat and targeting my glutes is very, very difficult because of the forward lean necessary to target my glutes and how the bar path needs to go to allow it to be a movement where my hips are moving back. It is extremely difficult for me to do. So, output wise, it doesn't make sense for me to hammer down and say, well, back squats are the answer for me to get in. That's not saying you shouldn't do back squats to grow glutes. Just for me specifically, might not be the best exercise for output. But I could swap that over to we actually have a Cybex squat press for leg press, and that is mimicking the back squat. But with I have not only more stabilization, so I can have more output, but it just allows me to push harder because I'm not having to worry about carrying this load and bending my body in this position that doesn't always work for me. But talking about back squats in general, I would say that if you're trying to grow your glutes, they can be a part of the program, but I wouldn't make it a main focus just because when we look at the systemic fatigue that is going to happen from doing back squats. Because when we talk about exercise selection, we're not only talking about, okay, what exercises are going to be best, but we also want to keep in mind what that looks like for your overall intensity and then your overall volume and how much volume. Because when we're looking at hypertrophy, when we're looking at growth, it is going to be a volume game to a certain extent and how much volume you can get on the muscle. If we're using back squats as our main mover for glutes, you can't get in as many back squats or after you do your set of back squats, if you try to go into a bunch of other glute movements, you are not only going to be absolutely taxed from the whole fatigue for your whole body that went into the back squats, but it's also putting you in a place where, and I mean, that's going to go into you can't perform other exercises. And that's even something within programming that people get hurt because they do something and they are going at a certain intensity, then they try to go into another movement that is going to require a lot of stabilization. Like a back squat requires a lot of stabilization because there's not that extra stabilization in place. Like machines create stabilization for you. And so if you're thinking about how can I bias this and not have my other muscles or the muscle I need to work get so fatigued, then you want to keep that in mind. But I also like to be able to think about what it looks like for what position you're training that muscle in. So there's research to show that lengthened position is best for hypertrophy, but all three lengths are going to be needed to have more complete growth, like more total growth overall. So when I always mention those back to back because I don't want someone to say, okay, I'm only going to do lengthened exercises because they do go, you need to do all of them within shortened, mid range, and lengthened to be able to have the best growth overall. So, what I would advise, obviously, this is going to be more general information overall. I'm not personally programming for each and every one of you, but I would say pick two exercises that challenge the glutes most in the lengthened position, and then one to two exercises that challenge the glutes most in the shortened position. So, some examples of this for being able to get in the lengthened position are going to be like a bent knee RDL. That would be great for getting your glutes in the lengthened position. Or, like I already mentioned, of a leg press when you have the right foot positioning and all of that to be able to get the glutes in the lengthened position, as well as just because a squat slash a leg press are going to be like a split squat, that type of movement. You're doing a squat movement, and then a split squat is another great option to get your glutes in that lengthened position. And then for getting them in the shortened position, we want to take a look at something like a barbell glute bridge or a glute med kickback, or even like a 45-degree hip extension. So you basically want to pick two exercises that do the lengthened, two that do the shortened, and then be able to use those to challenge the glutes again, most in totality. And by simply doing these exercises are not going to ipso facto get you the glutes of your dreams. It's being able to train hard over time with proper program design and progressions. But it's just something to keep in mind because I always like to give something actionable instead of just talking in huge generalities. And then people are like, well, how do I apply that to myself? Of here's some action that you can take of making sure that you're training things in the length and in the shortened, being able to really get good at those exercises and get after that. Because I also think, I know I talked about volume, but people think more is better. And that's not always the case with anything in life. But people think I need to be training glutes 3 times a week to see growth. And I can tell you that you can see plenty of growth with training them 2 times a week, and maybe even better growth because you have the proper time to recover in between, which means that you're going to have more strength and output during the sessions that you're doing them to be able to see the growth that you want to be able to see overall. And I also find that when people are programming, that they might program just because they want to be like intense, or they want to feel sore, they want to do as many leg movements. People will kind of go into the gym and be like, what's a leg movement or what's a glute movement? I'm going to destroy my glutes. Where people then end up basically doing the same movement pattern over and over and over again. In fact, Alex was just telling me that like The Rock walked through like his leg workout for something. And it was that he started with a 45-degree leg press. Then he went into a vertical leg press. Then he went into a hack squat. Then he went into like a split squat. And then he went into something else where it was just like the squat movement the whole time. And it's like, you didn't have any hinge, you didn't have any hip extension. We need to be able to work the glutes through all of those ranges. And that's what I see, is that people just like duplicate what they're trying to do. And it's like, instead of being like, okay, I'm going to do back squat, then I'm going to do leg press, then I'm going to do a split squat, because those are all leg and glute exercises. It's like, let's be a little bit more intelligent with this and think, how can I have a squat? How can I have a hinge? How can I get to hip extension? And being able to include all of that within your training. And again, you don't need to annihilate yourself with 20 different exercises. I can tell you, you can get the job done with 4 or 5 exercises, and you will be good if, again, you're having the correct intensity, the correct execution, and being able to, like, I guess that's with execution of like knowing how to actually engage the muscle instead of just thinking, how do I get from point A to point B? It's like, how do I make sure the tension is on the muscle? And that's something where I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm an anatomy expert. Maybe Alex could say that about himself, but I will not say that about myself. But what I will say is understanding or learning a little bit about anatomy is going to help you largely, because your understanding of, again, not just that point A to point B, but why you're trying to move things. And I'm not saying you need to memorize exactly where the origin and insertion point is of all of the muscles, because those are a lot of long and confusing names, and it might confuse you or discourage you of like, I don't understand this. And again, you don't need to, but knowing generally of like, oh, okay, for my lat, it's actually going to attach on the back of my upper arm. So that means I'm going to need to have a neutral grip to hit my lat more. And I want to think about lowering this upper arm first instead of just pulling my arm through. Like, that's going to help you understand things better if you just know some generalities of this originates in this area.
Yeah.
And this like inserts in this area, so that you can have that better picture, you can have that better visual of what you need to do when you're going through the movement.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, that's a form, almost a form of mind muscle connection, or whatever phrase you want to use, of being
Yeah.
aware of how your body moves and not repetitively hitting the same movements. I just to kind of wrap up those takeaways, and then I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up. Is number one, doing movements that work for you, and like you said, if your lengths are such that you have a very horizontal back angle with like a low bar squat just to get sitting back, and the massive fatigue that comes with that, you're probably not hitting your glutes too much, right? Whereas, like, I know my back angle on the back squat, I get sore glutes. So for me, that's something that hits them, and I don't want bigger glutes. So I'll also not do that squat. I'm just kidding. The other thing is the fatigue and stimulus kind of balance, or stimulus to fatigue ratio of knowing what biases the things that you don't want to come along for the ride. So you mentioned machines can give you stability. Sometimes people criticize that aspect of machines. In your case, you're saying take advantage of that, because now you can isolate the movement that, or the muscle that you care about. You also mentioned working across the lengths, and that led to the discussion of like proper diversity of these exercises, and again, knowing your insertions. So really good principles for any part of the body, not just glutes, which I love this discussion because it is very principle based. If I messed anything up, let me know. I did want to ask a tangent to this, because we had somebody in our community, we had a bunch of questions. We're not going to get to them all, but Denise asked about movements that are gentle on the back, because she had back surgery. A lot of people are having back surgery these days, herniated discs and all that. And she said certain exercises like deadlifts or the glute machine will seem to aggravate her back. Now, and she's asking if it's a core issue. Now I know you can't, you would
Mhm.
want to ask her 10 questions to
Yes,
find out
I
what's
would.
really going on.
But
But is there
generally
anything that
speaking,
jumps to your mind of like
yeah.
general advice in that area?
I
Yeah.
would say, again, your core is going to play a role in that of just how you are executing that movement and being able to engage things. Because oftentimes you hear like deadlifts hurt my back, where it can just be of how you're setting up the movement or how you're even initiating the movement, of maybe the setup is great, but then you're just pulling from your lower back because you don't know how to engage those other muscles. But I would say that things where, again, you have more stability. I know you mentioned the glute machine causing some issues, but I would really be able to go back, look at videos either of yourself, watching videos of someone perform the movement, and then being able to go through it. But again, the more stability that you can create while still training your core, I would highly recommend to really look at your core. And like Philip mentioned at the beginning, your core isn't just your abs, it's going to be like your whole trunk and core box. So that is going to include a lot of things that a lot of times people are just looking at the abs overall. So, really being able to think about what that looks like for your whole core, because that is going to be huge. And being able to also create like the intra abdominal pressure to be able to do some of those movements, like being able to perform a deadlift, you have to be able to create that internal pressure in your core to be able to truly perform that without hurting your back. So, I would say it could be a core issue, but it also could be of making sure that the movements are going to be the best for you overall.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say from having trained all the years I've trained, still to this day, if I'm just a little sloppy in my RDLs, I know I'm going to have a sore back the next day
Mhm.
because there's certain movements where you've got to be tight, you've got to brace. Sometimes you wear a belt or whatever makes sense depending on the movement. But I love that. So okay, I like to ask this question of all guests. So before we wrap up here, and that is there any question you wish I had asked, and what is your answer?
I wish you had asked what I am personally doing to grow my glutes,
Okay,
and
let's
I
hear
would
it.
answer that I am doing the PD glute program to grow my glutes. So it's actually a 16-week program, which, if you follow it, I can guarantee that you are going to see glute growth, which I know there's not a lot of guarantees in this world, but I will guarantee if you actually put in the effort, you will see the results from this. This is a program that we spent years working on, trialing different sessions on clients, trialing different phases on clients, being able to work through what was going to be best. And then I ran through the 16-week program once we had it finished. And I saw throughout the 16 weeks, I saw 3 inches of glute growth. Now, of course, and I know we kind of mentioned that we'd circle back to it. So I'll loop it into this so that we can wrap it all up with a bow on it, of gaining glute tissue and possibly some extra body fat. And just in general, I would say that first we need to keep in mind that muscle weighs something, period. So even if you are saying, I want to gain 5 pounds of glute tissue, no fat whatsoever, that means that the scale is going to go up at least 5 pounds. But with that, to gain muscle, you cannot gain muscle completely without gaining any type of fat, but you can minimize that fat gain, which I think is where people get really backwards, is they want to think, I want to gain no fat, but instead you should really say, how can I limit the amount of fat that I am going to gain? And so that's something that we really worked on. And we also have a podcast episode about how to properly be in a surplus, and what it was kind of thought of I need to be in this massive bulk and I need to eat all of this food. And it's like, yes, you need to eat food if you want to grow a big ass, like that's facts, but it is also going to be the aspect that you don't need to be like eating so much food. We can be in a very small surplus and still see the results we're wanting if, again, that intensity and recovery is linked in together. They all work together. So it's not going to be just if I train really hard in the gym and then I never sleep, then I'm all good to go. Or if I eat all of this food and I do this, then it's all set. It's going to be multiple things that work together in that. So you don't need to gain a ton of fat, but you are likely going to gain a little bit. But also, you can hope that some of it goes to to your behind as a whole. But within the program, I'm actually running it again for the second time. I took about, I don't know, maybe it was 6 to 8 weeks of I was just doing like 30-minute sessions and doing full body sessions because that's all I could mentally and personally handle. And throughout that time, even with a lot going on personally, I was able to maintain the glute size that I had grown. I think that it only, the most I quote unquote lost was half an inch. But as soon as I started eating enough again and training again, that came back pretty quickly. And I was able to maintain the glute size that I put on even without having the program in place. And then I'm rerunning the program as a whole. But the main reason I want to mention it is that while it is a 16-week program, we actually decided to give away the first 4 weeks for free to really be able to get people into it, to see how great it was, to see what those results looked like. And I just want everyone to have nice glutes. So I will have that link in the show notes for if you are interested in growing your glutes and you are like, okay, I took the actionable things, but I'd rather have like a surefire plan, then I would highly recommend jumping in on that and then purchasing the other 12 weeks afterwards, because the 16 weeks as a whole is where you're really going to see the results, because there is that progression, like I talked about, of the way that you're going to see results over time is having the proper programming and the proper progression. And so we actually set it up perfectly that those first 4 weeks, no matter what training you're coming from, because oftentimes maybe someone's coming from a type of training and then they're going into another one and it's not geared the best, and that's just the volume allocations, there can be a lot of things at play. So those first 4 weeks is basically getting you all set on all the movement patterns and getting you all set on volume. So no matter what training phase you're coming from, that's going to kind of quote unquote reset where you're at. And then you'll be able to go into the 12 weeks and just like exponentially see the results from there and get you to where you want to go. So that is what I am doing right now. I am extremely passionate about it just because of the time that went into it, as well as I've reaped the benefits from it. And I just want to shout it from the mountains. And someone even called my results fake, which then made my ego way too big because I was like, I have never had enough glutes or another muscle for someone to claim that it's fake. I'm like, I will take, you have no idea what that just did for my ego. You
You're
probably
in the
meant
Hall
it
of
as a
Fame now,
major
yeah.
diss, but it really, really pumped me up there. But I just want other people to have that too.
Wow. Well, so with all these goodies that you're giving my audience, the glute program, plus you mentioned the video about RPE and intensity,
Yeah.
we're going to have a bunch of well-gluted people, that's not even a word,
Yeah.
walking
And
around
we'll
the
make it
planet.
a
So
word.
we'll make it a word. All right. So where can listeners learn more about you? We'll definitely have those call outs in the show notes, but anywhere
Yeah.
else you want them to find you?
I would say the main place that you can find and interact with me would be Instagram, and it's Sue Gaines, Suegainz. And if you're wondering where that name came from, it actually was from the fact that oh, my dog is having a dream right now and about to knock over the microphone. But I went to a Two Chains concert in college and then I became Sue Chains. And so then when I started fitness, it just made sense to become Sue Gaines. So from Instagram, you can basically find anything else that you need from me. But also have a podcast, which you can go over and hear Philip on as well.
That's right. That's right. All right. I'll put that all down in the show notes as usual. At Sue Gaines, the bonus video, the glute program, all the amazing stuff. This was awesome, Sue. Even better than as great as I thought it would be having you on here to talk about this, because it was very principle based and super helpful, no matter who you are, male, female, what you're going after in the world of training to get that physique you want. So thank you so much for coming on, Sue.
Thank you for having me.